COINTELPRO, or the Counterintelligence Program, is an FBI initiative that began in 1956. It was designed to extinguish communist movements, but over the next 15 years, overtook Black Panther, socialist, communist, feminist, anti-war, pro-indigenous, and immigrant movements. COINTELPRO is directly responsible for the harassment and assassinations of both Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. What the FBI did through COINTELPRO was illegal. They knew it was illegal, and they didn't care. To this day, the FBI still defends themselves on their website, claiming that COINTELPRO can't have been that bad because it was just a small operation. I mean, come on guys, we've actually done way worse stuff than any of this. Because it only constituted an alleged 0.2% of FBI efforts over 15 years, the public just needs to get off their backs, man. Violating civil liberties and human rights is fine when we just do it to brown people and communists, and we definitely don't do it to you. The FBI has, since their inception, been the political police of the United States, designed specifically to repress rebellion before it even started. What the FBI admits is that COINTELPRO took place between 1956 and 1971. While investigating the FBI, the United States Senate concluded that COINTELPRO had basically been going on for decades at this point, just without a name. And they presumed that similar tactics were still being used under the guise of federal investigation. But it's not like we need to get rid of the FBI. According to the FBI, they were just trying to protect national security, preventing violence, and maintaining the existing social and political order. Look guys, they're really just trying to keep the rich white guys at the top. Can we blame them? Yes, protecting your social and political class is not a reason to violate people's human rights, of course. And definitely not a reason to kill them. The direct objective of COINTELPRO, as stated by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize these movements and their leaders. In October of 1956, Hoover published a letter denouncing civil rights activists and leaders. In 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a civil rights group that Martin Luther King Jr. would later be a part of, was founded. Immediately upon its founding, the FBI began to investigate it very closely. Based on the beginning of this timeline, it seems like there was one specific demographic targeted for COINTELPRO. White supremacists have long been afraid of Black people integrating as their equals. People naturally tend to assume that everyone else is just like them until they're proven otherwise. This is something that would typically happen in early development, but in a white supremacist society, for some, it never happens. In these societies, you're supposed to conform, so unless you're born different for some reason, a lot of people don't even notice that they are conforming. They believe who they are to be a true representation of themselves and not a mold that they fit themselves into and expect everyone else to fit themselves into. If the mold of a white adult man is one of no empathy, a propensity towards violence, self-preservation above all, and believing yourself the right way to be, these people will likely assume that all other people are fitting into this mold as well. Their immediate environment often mirrors that back as truth, and so they never reflect on it deeper. They therefore believe that the Black people that they've so long oppressed will turn around and do the same or worse to them. Hurt people is a phrase often thrown around after tragedy, but it really isn't true, and it only helps abusers and oppressors. People who want to hurt people. And more often than not, when you've gone through a lot of pain yourself, you look for ways to alleviate other people's pain, not cause them more. These fears are just manifestations of oppressive people's own projections that they're too afraid to face. If they can pretend to be scared about what violence or oppression might come with equality, they don't have to think about the fact that they are oppressive and violent now. The 1950s was the era of McCarthyism and Jim Crow, and the 1960s was a direct response to that societal system. If each demographic stays in their box, we won't have any problems. As soon as people start stepping outside of their boxes and asking for freedom and equality, the whole foundation crumbles. And now people are against war. It's just unacceptable and too risky to the basis of society. When the masses gained the ability to see what war was like firsthand, they couldn't stomach it. Color televisions in most living rooms across the United States opened people's eyes to what their tax dollars were really funding. Blood makes a lot more of an impact when it's red and not gray. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was one of the largest contributors to this age of McCarthyism and the Red Scare. COINTELPRO was justified using the reasoning of finding and neutralizing communist threats. Hoover would frequently reprimand his agents for being unable to find evidence directly linking communism to the groups that were being investigated. No links to foreign communist governments were ever found in the entire 15 years of COINTELPRO. A lack of evidence never really bothered the FBI, though. Civil rights activists and leaders were arrested repeatedly on bogus charges until they could no longer make bail. False witnesses were hired to testify against activists, and that resulted in lengthy prison sentences. FBI agents infiltrated groups and started suggesting that other people were secret federal investigators. This strategy, snitch jacketing, both turned activists against each other and turned eyes away from the actual federal agents. In black bag jobs, federal agents illegally raided homes, businesses, and other private residences to steal documents, written materials, and anything pertaining to political movements. Agents contacted activists' friends, family members, jobs, and even media outlets to spread lies and discredit them. Agent provocateurs were recruited to sabotage the civil rights movements, largely using nonviolent non-cooperation advocated for in the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. These agents also incited violence, often proposing violent plans and even providing people with weapons. These acts of violence were then, of course, used as reasons to imprison people. Once the Black Panther Party became the primary target of COINTELPRO, the party's energy entirely changed. PSYOP political propaganda cartoons were released to the public to incite violence against Black Panthers, including art of David Hilliard, Black Panther leader, being lynched. As a result of this propaganda and the environment it caused, San Diego, home of the Black Panther Party, became a much more dangerous place. Between 1968 and 1971, COINTELPRO efforts resulted in the confirmed murders of Black Panther activists Arthur Morris, Bobby Hutton, Stephen Bartholomew, Robert Lawrence, Tommy Lewis, Welton Armstead, Frank Digg, Alprentice Carter, John Huggins, Alex Rackley, John Savage, Sylvester Bell, Larry Robertson, Nathaniel Clark, Walter Pope, Spurgeon Winters, Sterling Jones, Eugene Anderson, Babatunde Onwar-Wally, Carl Hampton, Jonathan Jackson, Fred Bennett, Sandra Pratt, Robert Webb, Samuel Napier, Harold Russell, and George Jackson. In 1969, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were shot and killed by Chicago police officers in a raid on their apartment. Fred Hampton was shot dead in his bed after being drugged. His bodyguard, also the chief of security for the Black Panthers, was a federal informant. Police claimed that they raided the apartment due to confusion about shooting, who shot first, in court using the defense that the weird angles of the corners of the apartment made the sound and visuals confusing. But Roy Mitchell, the informant who was undercover as a bodyguard, had provided officials with floor plans of the apartment, and they were used during the raid. The Chicago Tribune reported that Mitchell was the head of Chicago COINTELPRO operations. While the FBI has publicly denied any involvement with Malcolm X's assassination, the Chicago special agent in charge counted his death among successful counterintelligence operations. Following his famous speech in 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. became the #1 target of the FBI. COINTELPRO leader and assistant director of the FBI, William C. Sullivan, is quoted saying this after his speech. The objective of the Southern Christian Leadership Convention isn't something that would be considered far left or woke today, but at the time, it was seen very much as a threat in the eyes of the FBI. Memos sent within the agency pinned King as the greatest threat to the established order. His movement was growing every day, meaning that America's biggest threat was also growing every day. What was that threat exactly? The right for Black Americans to vote. The Southern Christian Leadership Convention aimed to secure the right to vote for Black Americans, end segregation, and make overt and violent displays of racism illegal. Ideals nearly all Americans except those on the extreme far right would agree with in 2025. As early as 1957, FBI supervisors set their eyes on civil rights movements, claiming those groups to be communist. In 1958, when the FBI began its investigation of the Southern Christian Leadership Convention, their only evidence was that a member of the Social Workers' Party had offered their clerical services to convention. The FBI continued to investigate members, and later that year, Martin Luther King Jr. was under investigation. The FBI knew very well and admitted openly to the fact that it would be very difficult to get King behind bars if they were bound by legal restraints. They gathered evidence, and then the FBI, right after he had won the Nobel Peace Prize but before he had accepted it, sent King a suicide kit, and it had this note in it. King, look in your heart. You know that you are a complete fraud and a great liability to all of us. White people in this country have enough frauds of their own, and I'm sure that they don't have one at this time that is anywhere near your equal. You are no clergyman, and you know it. I repeat, you are a colossal fraud, and an evil, vicious one at that. King, there's only one thing left for you to do. You know what that is. You have just 34 days in which to do this. You are done. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is barred to the nation. They had sent death threats and urges to suicide before this, but now it was different. In November of 1964, they sent a briefcase filled with audio recordings that would mark him guilty of alleged sexual misconduct and even abuse. He was advised by the FBI to commit suicide, or before he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, the audio tapes would be released to the public. King didn't comply, and the tapes were released. Newsweek was offered the story to publish, but they rejected it out of a lack of evidence. Very few outlets, and especially not reputable outlets, actually took the chance to publish this story, making the mission largely ineffective. There were still divisions and opinions on this alleged sexual wrongdoing. There was no direct evidence of King committing any non-consensual act on a person. There was evidence of King witnessing somebody commit a non-consensual act on somebody else, and even encouraging them to do it. Many argue that the FBI tapes were spliced together productions created specifically to discredit King. With all the evidence that we've seen so far, that's certainly not out of the picture, and wouldn't even be the worst thing a government agency did to him. When abusive men like Gandhi, for example, are whitewashed in the view of history, their victims are permanently silenced. I am always a proponent of believing victims. I looked, and I couldn't find any victims of Martin Luther King Jr. There are many reports of extramarital affairs and illegitimate children, but nobody has ever claimed, as far as I have seen, that Martin Luther King Jr. abused them in any way. And it can certainly be argued that he used his power to coerce or persuade women into sleeping with him. But if this was anything other than a very lazy attempt at discrediting King, there would likely be allegations from the supposed victims. Over the summer of 1967, a new program began, COINTELPRO Black Hate. This program was specifically designed to take down Black liberation movements. A March 1968 memo to FBI officials instructs them to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify the Black nationalist movement, pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them before they exercise their potential for violence, prevent them from gaining respectability by discrediting them, prevent the long-range growth of militant Black organizations, especially among youth. To effectively neutralize these threats, the FBI was determined to stop them before they started. They didn't wait for revolutionary action, but they pounced on leaders and would-be leaders before they even got a chance to be radicalized. Martin Luther King Jr. remained under close federal investigation until his death on April 4th, 1968. This is a death that the government has claimed responsibility for, but only after being sued by the family. And in the same way, COINTELPRO may have never become public knowledge, forever remaining just a conspiracy. Muhammad Ali was a primary target for COINTELPRO as he was a member of the Nation of Islam. In March of 1971, he was set to fight Joe Frazier in what was hyped to be the fight of the century. With full FBI attention on the boxing match, the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI took this opportunity to rob an FBI field office in Pennsylvania, obtain documents proving abuse of power by the FBI, and blow the whistle to other agencies. The Washington Post, once they verified the information was true, was the first to publish the story, and other media outlets soon followed suit. In less than a year, J. Edgar Hoover announced that the FBI would be dissolving COINTELPRO, and that going forward, any counterintelligence would take place on a case-by-case basis. The United States Senate was called to investigate the FBI and had this to say during a hearing. The committee finds that the domestic activities of the intelligence community at times violated specific statutory prohibitions and infringed the constitutional rights of American citizens. The legal questions involved in intelligence programs were often not considered. On other occasions, they were intentionally disregarded in the belief that because the programs served the national security, the law did not apply. While intelligence officers on occasion failed to disclose to their superiors programs which were illegal or questionable in legality, the committee finds that the most serious breaches of duty were those of senior officials who were responsible for the controlling intelligence agencies, and generally failed to assure compliance with the law. Many of the techniques used would be intolerable in a democratic society, even if all the targets had been involved in violent activity. But COINTELPRO went far beyond that. The Bureau conducted a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association. On the theory that preventing the growth of dangerous groups and the propagation of dangerous ideas would protect the national security and deter violence. This committee also researched the FBI's history of doing acts like this. They found that as early as the 1920s, the agency that would eventually become the FBI would round up political dissenters for deportation. The Black Panther and civil rights movements weren't the first counterintelligence target of the FBI, and they weren't the last. Militias were formed, rights were violated, the innocent were imprisoned, all in the name of fighting communism. The United States government seems to have a pattern of severely overstepping and using communism as an excuse. Join us next time as we talk about COINTELPRO's effects on the American Indian movement.